Years before John Hughes would make his indelible mark on Hollywood, he grew up a quiet, lonely kid interested in art and writing. But his working-class upbringing steered him towards getting a real office job instead of pursuing his creative inclinations. Hughes spent his 20s working for high-profile Chicago-based ad agencies as a copywriter, a decent outlet for his natural creative writing skills.
I was just working to be accepted as a writer, which I, never thought. Everybody in my family's always been like a generic businessman. So creative was, you could be an advertising executive. That was acceptable because you wore a tie and you went to a job and you worked for a company and you sold products, but you were able to think up stuff and be creative. So it took me a long time to accept the fact that I was actually earning a living as a writer.
Taking frequent trips to New York for his ad work eventually got Hughes a side gig contributing articles to the hugely popular National Lampoon humor magazine, which he was able to do while still working and living in Chicago. By the late 70s, National Lampoon had produced its first feature, Animal House, which became one of the decade's biggest and most ripped-off comedies. But after a couple more National Lampoon productions came and went with little fanfare, and as the magazine itself was losing its financial footing, producing another hit film became the company's top priority. The film's premise would be based on one of writer John Hughes' most well-known National Lampoon articles, and he even got the chance to pen the screenplay.
Wally World, here we come!
National Lampoon's Vacation became a huge hit in 1983. The same summer, Hughes saw another one of his semi-autobiographical screenplays, Mr. Mom, turn into another hit comedy. By now, Hughes had the clout to not just write, but also direct. And in the span of less than 3 years, he wrote and directed a string of some of the biggest teen comedies of the decade: 16 Candles, The Breakfast Club, Weird Science, and Ferris Bueller's Day Off, along with writing the screenplays for National Lampoon's European Vacation, Pretty in Pink, and Some Kind of Wonderful. But once you've been the creative force behind all of these wildly popular teen films in such a condensed time frame, where do you go from here? Well, the guy who got his screenwriting start with National Lampoon's Vacation was about to embark on yet another road trip from hell.
It actually happened to me. I left Chicago for New York for a one-day trip, planned to come back that night, and ended up in Wichita and got home 5 days later. So that's where the idea came from.
As a screenwriter, John Hughes became well known for writing scripts loosely based on his own life experiences, be it a family trip gone haywire in National Lampoon's Vacation, anxieties of being a stay-at-home dad in Mr. Mom, or looking back on his high school years in 16 Candles, The Breakfast Club, and Ferris Bueller. And after spearheading one hit teen movie after another, Hughes shifted gears and instead wrote a treatment inspired by his days as a Chicago-based ad copywriter. Planes, Trains, and Automobiles stars Steve Martin as high-strung marketing executive Neil Page, who's on a last-minute business trip to New York before Thanksgiving and is desperately trying to make it back home to Chicago to be with his family in time for the holiday. But along the way, he faces countless obstacles and keeps crossing paths with obnoxious traveling salesman Del Griffith, played by John Candy. One of the strongest attributes in all of John Hughes' best work was matching the actor to the character, and Planes, Trains, and Automobiles continued this tradition of Hughes' ability to write memorable, fleshed-out characters that jumped right off the page. Then he'd cast the right actors to fill those roles, then he'd continue tweaking his script with the actors' input all the way until the film was completed.
I think any actor, comedian especially, is really interested in good scripts. And when this kind of talent comes along, like took me 2.5 years to write Roxanne. It took me 3 days to write Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. Or 4, or did it go into 5? This guy's the fastest writer in the world.
When I sit down to write a script, I try to get it done as quickly as I can to see if I like the idea. Then I go through maybe 25, 30 rewrites. And that rewriting process doesn't finish until I lock the film, which I do at the absolute last minute. How long it takes me to do a first draft? No, I don't sit there for 12 months because I can't write dialogue like that. I write dialogue as fast as I can say it. Fortunately, I'm a fairly good typist.
It's the perfect showcase for both Martin and Candy, who were both cast against type and got the chance to really flex their dramatic chops, particularly Candy's wonderfully layered performance that just breaks your heart by the movie's finale. Martin and Candy were in top form here, and with such a prolific talent like John Hughes there to provide them with his signature witty dialogue, hilarious character-driven moments, and sharp direction, Planes, Trains, and Automobiles became an instant Thanksgiving staple upon its 1987 release, and has been a timeless holiday classic ever since.
Sometimes there are two people thrown together type movies where it's just frustrating, where you just go, well, it's clearly he just should leave, or they should just never see each other again, or why doesn't one of them call the police, or, there are all kinds of questions. I think this script is clever in that it really does chip away possibilities, and they really are stuck together in a fairly legitimate way. Certainly for comic purposes.
The Blu-ray offers some decent special features that focus on the film itself, while others celebrate John Hughes' life and work as a whole. John Hughes' Life Moves Pretty Fast is a well-made two-part documentary that explores Hughes' illustrious filmmaking career during the 80s, his later years out of the limelight, and his lasting legacy. We also get several shorter featurettes that strictly focus on Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, including an informative behind-the-scenes piece, a quick look at Hughes' work after drifting away from the teen comedy genre, and a loving tribute to the late John Candy, along with one single deleted scene. There are plenty of reasons why Planes, Trains, and Automobiles is still so cherished and remains to be an annual must-watch, for me at least. You have the pairing of two genius comedians in Steve Martin and John Candy who are at the top of their game with pitch-perfect performances and effortless chemistry. And then you have John Hughes, a masterful screenwriter and director who was always able to take relatable characters and situations and inject them with heaping doses of hilarity and heart. It's not only one of his best films, but I'd probably go so far as to call it one of the great 80s comedies in general. I'll give Planes, Trains, and Automobiles a 5 out of 5 final recommendation.
Here we go.
Originally released the day before Thanksgiving in 1987, Planes, Trains, and Automobiles was a big hit for John Hughes and Paramount Pictures, earning nearly $50 million on a $30 million budget. It marked a real turning point in Hughes' career, where he completely left behind the teen comedy genre and continued down the path of producing more family-oriented films, predominantly ones featuring John Candy, who would become a reoccurring collaborator with Hughes, starring alongside Dan Aykroyd in 1988's The Great Outdoors, which Hughes only wrote, and then headlining 1989's Uncle Buck under Hughes' direction, which was an even bigger hit than Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, and has since become one of Candy's most beloved parts. Uncle Buck also featured a young Macaulay Culkin in one of his first roles, and his scene-stealing performance inspired Hughes to write a new film just for him.
A lovely cheese pizza just for me.
When Home Alone was released during the 1990 holiday season, it held the #1 spot at the box office for 12 straight weeks and remained in theaters for over a year, earning nearly $500 million on an $18 million budget and becoming the third highest grossing film of all time, just behind Star Wars and E.T. Looking back, Home Alone seemingly marked yet another turning point for John Hughes, to the point where the majority of his output in the coming years would be mostly kid-targeted family films, as if he had become completely pigeonholed by Home Alone's jaw-dropping success. In 1991, Hughes wrote and produced a comedy that felt like it was very much in the same vein as Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, but with a little dash of Home Alone thrown into the mix. And that film was the coming-of-age road trip comedy Dutch, starring Married with Children's Ed O'Neill as Dutch Dooley, a working-class schlub who's dating the wealthy mother of an obnoxious, spoiled brat from her previous marriage. In an attempt to get closer to his girlfriend, he offers to drive down from Chicago to the kid's boarding school in Georgia and bring him home for Thanksgiving. But little does Dutch know what he's getting himself into. Not surprisingly, Dutch is a bit of a forgotten early 90s comedy, but it's one I fondly remember seeing in theaters when I was very young. So for years, it's been as much an annual Thanksgiving fixture for me as Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. Sure, it feels a bit derivative, but I'm more forgiving of that in this case, knowing that John Hughes was behind both of these films. Dutch flopped hard though, unfortunately, making back less than a third of its $17 million budget. In fact, it was such a huge bomb that even Ed O'Neill's own show, Married with Children, used its failure as a punchline on more than one occasion.
This is your captain speaking. Will the gentleman in 24B please put his shoes back on? I'm choking to death.
Al!
Oh, please. They show us the movie Dutch and they think I stink?
But I've never really understood why Dutch wasn't more successful than it was. I mean, it came out less than a year after Home Alone, which was also produced and written by John Hughes. It starred Ed O'Neill, who at the time was the star of an extremely successful sitcom, and it was directed by Peter Feynman, the Aussie director behind the wildly successful Crocodile Dundee, the second highest grossing film of 1986. It had all the ingredients of a hit comedy, but if it's remembered at all, it's likely just seen as the poor man's Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. Another story about a mismatched pair, weathering the cold as they try to get home for Thanksgiving. But for me, it's the funny chemistry and obvious age difference between Ed O'Neill and young Ethan Embry that really sets it apart. O'Neill's performance is not that far off from his iconic schlubby portrayal of Al Bundy, and Embry is somewhat channeling Macaulay Culkin from Home Alone, but he starts off much more spoiled and a lot less likable, which was certainly by design. John Hughes may not have been the director this time around, but being the producer and screenwriter, Dutch certainly feels like one of his films through and through, with its efficient character development, its ear for hilarious dialogue, and its big heart. But who knows? Maybe that's just the nostalgia talking. Dutch was released on Blu-ray by Anchor Bay in 2012, but other than having improved picture quality over the DVD, the only special feature is the film's theatrical trailer, and that's a pretty big letdown. Oh wait, I guess it doesn't matter. It's straight out of print anyway. Shit. Well, maybe since it was originally produced by 20th Century Fox, which was recently acquired by Disney, perhaps it'll pop up on Disney Plus someday. But I wouldn't hold my breath. For obvious reasons, I think Dutch makes for a perfect double feature with Planes, Trains, and Automobiles during this time of the year. Both are filled with hilarious moments and satisfying emotional beats that make them feel a whole lot more than just typical screwball comedies. That being said though, there's no question which one is the better John Hughes production, even though I've always had a soft spot for Dutch and likely saw it before ever seeing Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. Dutch is certainly worth seeking out, but I'll settle on giving it a 3 out of 5 final recommendation.
I'm so lonesome I could cry.
Life moves pretty fast. You don't stop and look around once in a while, you could miss it.
It's hard to believe that it's been a whole decade since we lost John Hughes, a man whose wit and big heart were right there on screen. He was a respected filmmaker, a sharp observer, and a devoted family man. But it's a shame we weren't able to get more films out of him. Sure, there are some moments in his movies that don't quite hold up today, if they ever did.
What's happening, hot stuff?
But he excelled at creating high-concept, crowd-pleasing comedies that were grounded, relatable, and character-driven looks at Midwestern America. But unfortunately, his passion for it waned over time as he became increasingly jaded toward the film industry, and after the sudden loss of his good friend and muse, John Candy.
I think John took things very personally in the movie business, and if you're in the movie business for a long time, you realize it's not personal. It's just a stupid business, you know? And if you can love the stupidity and say, you know what, it's entertaining, you can, you know, have a career that spans decades in this business and really enjoy yourself. But John, I think, cared too deeply about what he was doing to let that stuff go.
But his legacy will live on, and even continues to be felt in some of today's biggest blockbusters, like how crucial of a role the music played in the Guardians of the Galaxy films, or how the current Spider-Man movies lean heavy on Hughes-inspired high school comedy.
You guys are losers.
But then why do you sit with us?
Because I don't have any friends.
Farewell, John. Thanks for the tears, thanks for the laughs, and thanks for the pillows.
Where's your other hand? Between two pillows. Those aren't pillows. Ah!